Thank you for joining us. Everyone, come on in. I'm Michael Cohn, partner at GSV Ventures. I can tell by the audience, as can you, we are the last session in between some booze and some food, and people are trying to figure out, you know what, I've been listening to content and panels for months over Zoom. Now let's get together, let's see one another. So let's have a great conversation. We'll keep it light, we'll keep it fun. It's a serious topic. And with that, I am just so excited. Not often do I have an opportunity to moderate a panel of entrepreneurs that are all within the GSV family. So first of all, welcome, and it's great to see everyone in person. The topic today is using AI to get an edge in personal development. So again, with this group, and what I'm so excited about is the fact that you all are building or have built offerings with deep AI backgrounds that are helping people get an edge in professional development. So today we'll be talking about challenges and opportunities and the feedback you're getting from buyers and learners, things like toxicity and platforms like GPT-3 and the role of the user in data-centric models. And I'll spare the audience with traditional intros, but what I think they all would love to hear, and what I would certainly love to hear for the probably 100th time with you, Rohan, but for the first or second time with you, Erica and Joel, is just a bit more about your backgrounds. And at a macro level, what about what is happening in AI brought you to create your companies? And most importantly, what are your goals? So with that, I'll start with you, Rohan.
Yeah, so we had a very stereotypical startup story. My co-founder is a college dropout. And we were all computer science students about 4 or 5 years ago at the University of Illinois. We all had a deep fascination in AI. It was pretty clear that there were major paradigm shifts happening at the time. But it was mostly like problem-centric. So my co-founder came up with an AI model to rewrite sentences and scrape together a rough MVP in literally a week, put it up on Reddit and other social media platforms, and it just started to take off. From there, we really started to deep dive into the technology, iterate on it, and expand the product offering. So 4 years later, we built out a whole team specializing in natural language generation, and are looking to build out the next generation of AI-assistive writing tools, namely word processing and grammar correction.
Jen?
Sure, thanks, Michael. Somehow I managed to be the business and product person on an AI panel again. Promised me that wasn't going to happen.
Nope, I'm the investor, so I know the least. You're fine.
Anyhow, so what I can tell you is, at least from Photomath's founding, it really started off with a parent, quite frankly, who was utilizing computer vision to analyze numbers, think about how it could be applied to the financial system, and really experienced, a true user everyday situation and problem, which was he was trying to teach his 14-year-old son how to do math homework and really struggling. And as an engineer who was really good at math, he was like, if I'm struggling, imagine all the other parents and students out there. So even though our company is one that has this deep history, roots a lot of investment into AI and technology, the founding story really is still about the user experience and how do you apply that technology in a way that helps people learn.
Hello? Okay, cool. My name is Erica. We build Toko, which is a language learning app that helps English learners in East Asia achieve speaking fluency through talking to an AI. So instead of having to book a tutor, we've built a voice bot that will have a dynamically generated conversation with you. And the way that our founding story starts with the pandemic and me reconnecting with my grandma, and my co-founder also reconnecting with her grandma. My family's from China, her family's from Taiwan, and I realized that my conversational Chinese was just not up to par, but I also realized that my grandma only wanted to have 3 conversations with me. When I was gonna get married, how much money I made, and when I was gonna come visit her. And so I was like, if I nail these 3 conversations, we're gonna crush it. And it turns out I wasn't alone in this idea of people want to learn specific context-based spoken conversations. And what my co-founder and I learned was instead of teaching people Chinese, like our problem, there's way more demand for the other way around. So my co-founder and I met at MIT. We're both engineers. We hacked together a little chatbot. Over the weekend, we started sharing it, kind of similar to Rohan, quite organically on Facebook groups, language exchange Facebook groups, and kind of just iterated from there into what it is today.
So I'm Joel. My background is applied ML and ML infra, machine learning infrastructure. In 2019, I started leading assessments engineering at LinkedIn and built a lot of 0 to 1 products like skill assessments and screening questions, video intro. And this led into a product where we were doing sourcing into screening to help people with diverse backgrounds get past the artificial requirements like degree requirements and years of experience. And it was pretty cool, but it got frustrating. And the frustration was we do all this work to build this great funnel, and then the candidates dump into the traditional crappy ad hoc interviewing. And this led me and Scott last year in June to build a startup and to solve it. And so that's Hireguide. So we help hiring managers and their teams build really good structured interview loops. We provide, for a ton of roles, we provide IO-Psych validated content and instrument the interviews, capture the feedback, help them score it using principle-based scoring, and roll that into a decide process. And threaded all through this is NLP and AI, not to evaluate the candidate, but to help the interviewer work through the process and keep them focused on what they set up front is important, not that comfort that is how they traditionally evaluate.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so Erica already shared what happened during COVID that accelerated, the growth of Toko. I'd love to hear, for the others of you, the most common question that people are asking in the hallways and outside is, what have you been up to? And what did COVID do for you? And how did COVID accelerate your business? So for Joel and for Jen and for Rohan, as you think about now just where we are as from a technological standpoint, but also just in terms of how folks have now kind of reconstructed their days and how they view technology, how has COVID either accelerated or decelerated or caused, call it a broad embrace of more data-centric and AI-driven tools for math, for writing, for hiring and assessment? How are you all kind of thinking through, and what is that response from a product standpoint around how we all have now seen a greater embrace of AI?
I can dive in.
Yeah.
So at LinkedIn, on my side gig over my 8 years there, I did 550 interviews. And for almost the entire time, having technology in the interview room was anathema. It was a no-go. Even having a laptop in front of you kind of broke the connection with the candidate. And coming into COVID, the remote interviews changed everything. People were used to having technology in the room, having it in the session, being used to even being recorded. And this completely changed the opportunity to help bring technology into the conversation to help fix it.
Others?
Yeah, so COVID, particularly for students, decreased accessibility to writing instructors, writing centers, things like that. And simultaneously, the technology started to get really good to the point where AIs could provide meaningful feedback to users, reformulate sentences to be at human level fluency, things like that, and that just accelerated the trend of building an augmented writing assistant, or augmenting the user's writing process with an AI assistant.
I would say for us, it really coincided with some technological developments. There was a lot of progress on our side in actually understanding or being able to better understand what is the math problem a student is trying to solve, and going from what we used to do, which was just optical character recognition extraction, and then trying to figure it out by some heuristics to an actual full end-to-end machine learning model-driven approach to understanding what is the student actually trying to learn. And I think that just coincided with precisely the same trend that Rohan was saying, which is students needed access. They needed people to help explain things, to break down concepts, and many times they didn't even know what to ask, right? And that's where that, at least from our standpoint, the recognition part becomes really, really powerful.
Yep. And Jen, so you just brought up the notion of understanding, and I'll maybe take it in a different direction, but just the notion of really, AI and its ability to score and evaluate, but also the risk of over-relying on it at the expense of personalized progress. So as you all, and whether it's Photomath for your 5 years or Quillbot for your 4 years, and even now with Hireguide and with Toko, how are you all thinking about kind of data and efficacy of data and modeling, but also not being overly reliant on it until you truly understand the user experience?
I think it's a great question around what is the push and pull components of your interaction and making sure you have the right balance of that. In many cases for us, we actually are really driven by the pull. Like, it's a demand from the student to help and understand. And then once they come in through that door, we can kind of start guiding them and giving some of that personalization as to maybe would be helpful, right? But I think it is a really good question around making sure that we don't take away the agency of learning from students. So it's recommendations about what you might need to learn, but also making sure that your recommendation engines are expansive, and broad enough that we're not just kind of spoon-feeding students a direct and singular pathway for learning.
Right, and it's different, not that it's different, but I think, so personalized math instruction, personalized writing instruction, what I believe to be one of the most advanced and progressive kind of AI-driven language instruction, which is now, and I'll blow up your spot a little bit, the #3 language learning app around English in Taiwan, which is just remarkable. But Joel, I'll bring it to you, right? When it is so high stakes in terms of hiring and assessment, and ultimately what Hireguide will do long-term, making all of us better interviewers, how do you react to what Jen just said in terms of not being overly reliant on the automation versus the augmentation of data?
Absolutely. So we're viewing the AI's role is to help the human make a better decision, not to make the decisions for them. There are other players in the space, not so much in the interviewing, but in the video vetting, where they're doing AI evaluation. Might be a place in the vetting where you can at least roll out the bottom 25%, but bottom of the funnel in the interviewing, we believe that this is a firmly human activity, humans evaluating humans, and our goal is to use the AI to keep them focused on the things they set up as front, as material to the person's job performance, not making that decision for them. And so it's almost all of our AI is focused on what the interviewer did, not on what the candidate did. You can think of it as matching the questions that they were supposed to ask to the script, help them score that, map them back on the scoring to find inconsistencies in what they did, and have them challenge them with the inconsistencies to resolve. So it's really, you can think of it as a decision support system.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We try to build all our products to be strictly human in the loop, where we create multiple recommendations for the user, let the user pick and choose the best recommendations to apply to their writing. I think this has a lot of benefits. One of the benefits is it actually enables users to learn better writing. But in addition, these AI systems aren't perfect. There could be bias in the systems, and it sort of creates a check on that. And then I think ultimately, in the context of writing, we feel it's very important to allow users to convey their own novel viewpoint of the world. And by creating multiple options, users can best select language that reflects their own voice.
I'm going to provide actually a counterexample to these three over here. So in these three industries, I think it's not widely accepted to rely on an AI for evaluative purposes. I find this to be actually very different in the language learning space, where a lot of our users actually expect AI-driven assessment. And I think this is for a couple of reasons. I think the technology in speech recognition has gotten really, really good, and it continues to move extremely quickly, such that a lot of attributes of speech you can capture even better with AI than a human ear. So for example, like if I transcribe everything a user says, I can catch every single grammatical mistake, and I can listen to every single phonetic sound, whereas as a human, that might not be technically possible. I might be paying attention to something else. I'm a human, so maybe I get distracted. And what you see currently is these really big English tests, official standardized tests, using AI as a big part of their evaluative system. A lot of our competing apps will give like estimates of IELTS score. IELTS is a standardized test for English testing. We in our app, we give pronunciation feedback and pronunciation feedback scores, and we do it because our users expect it. So I think that's an interesting counterpoint.
I think symmetric to that. So one of the things we are looking at, where the AI can directly come in with what the candidate does, is there's a problem in the interviewing space. There's almost no upside for a company to give feedback back to the candidates. Opens up a whole can of worms. However, feedback like even how clear their spoken language is, are they leaned into the conversation? These things predict getting a job. They're not known to predict job performance, but we can give that feedback to the candidate, and it's not giving the company that interviewed them's perspective on them. It's giving them actual usable feedback that they can improve their performance. And for that use, AI directly evaluating the candidate, thumbs up, right? As long as we don't leak that back to the company, right?
So let's keep on building on that. And we had what I would say is one of the best pre-calls I've ever had for a panel a couple of weeks ago. And it actually went maybe, I think, up to an hour. And about midway through, I think we all landed on, a framing that data is everything, which, for this group of panelists, it makes sense, right? And then we had a fifth panelist, Ken Babcock at Tango, who's also terrific, who was in San Diego, but thinks he may have been exposed to something, so isn't on stage with us today. And he's like, I agree, but no. Early stage, what we can't do is be overly reliant on the data and the modeling until we truly understand the role of the user and the user experience in terms of really understanding what we are trying to accomplish. So how do you all, particularly early stage, and then for Erica and for Joel, coming from Palantir and from LinkedIn, as you all are now building your models, how are you walking that line in terms of really relying on the data while also not losing sight of the role of the user as it's shaping that perspective?
Yeah, I was getting coffee with Erica. I was talking about this and telling her all the funky techniques we used to synthesize data at the beginning of Quillbot, and Michael can attest to this as he was doing diligence on the company, but the quality was not good. But what it did was it allowed us to start getting some traction, getting user feedback, and start really investing in the data. And I think it's this sort of inextricable back and forth where the data informs the product you can build, and that in turn drives your traction, and that is the platform that you're ultimately iterating on. And so choosing your starting point is really important. Oftentimes, and we saw this with different features that we had, but if you can't get to a certain quality, you may not get the traction to really get your product to take off. And the difference between that could be just investing a bit more on your data. And then obviously like data and the annotators you leverage could introduce bias into the system. It really shapes how your AI is interacting with end users.
You guys want to?
I actually loved what Jennifer you mentioned in the pre-call, if you want.
Well, no, I don't remember what I said, so that's unfortunate. But what I can say is that, while data is everything, I think for us, the user perspective really, and obviously this shows my bias on the product side, business side, but it drives so much, right? Like, data to what end? How do we utilize that data? And I was actually thinking about it in a slightly different way, even as a maybe later stage company with a little bit, more, a little bit more resources, just to give you a sense of the investment that it takes, right? So for one of our main machine learning models, we have one researcher who's driving all the analysis. We have an additional 12 to 16 AI engineers who have to support that individual just to productionalize this and to get it into the app in a way that it'll actually be meaningful for the user and in a good user experience. There's so much optimizations. There's DevOps engineers. There's other, tons of other people supporting it. And so for us, it's like, if you're going to make that level of investment, right? It's not just one researcher's 6 months of time, 4 months of time. It's another team's 10 months of time. Then we really need to make sure that we understand the user experience really well when we head into it. How is that data? How can we utilize that data in a really meaningful way that's actually going to cause traction? And to your point, I wish we had that kind of foresight when we started, and we probably didn't. It just we lucked out a little bit in some sense. But as we continue to build, that becomes really crucial to understand the user experience.
I'd love to jump in here and just say, I think one of the things that we've all talked about is the interplay between the user experience and the data and how that can lead to better AI models. So it's not so exclusive in, is it user-driven, is it data-driven? It's actually an interplay of both, and one decision can impact downstream. A good example, I think, from our own product is, we have two. I think one, there's a lot that we can do to improve our audio quality. So accident speech recognition is a really hard machine learning problem. And so we've just done small things in our UX, we now have a mic check. So we make sure that the user can, hear what they're saying, and that improved audio quality by a ton and has really improved engagement. I think it increased our trial conversion by 2x, 3x, something as simple as just, introducing a small check, which improved our data quality. Another thing is we've, just the way that the user records, just the way we display the buttons and in what order, and do we show the text as they're speaking, or do we gray it out and then show it later? Do we hide it? Do we show it right away? That has all affected the transcription accuracy, and that therefore will affect how good our generative AI model is and the quality of data we get inputted. So just want to say that they're actually really cyclical and related.
That's actually a great point, and that I think what you want is a product that generates better and better data for you.
Exactly. It's how do you design a product in a way that will generate higher quality data?
Yeah, and those user signals are super important. I think the other thing that's really interesting is you can make certain product decisions that compensate for the current proficiency of your models. So earlier on, I was talking about how we show multiple options to users. In the beginning, we could only generate maybe 1 out of 3 good paraphrases, and so showing all 3, we let the user pick the good one. And so I think that's a really effective way of still productionizing models that aren't fully accurate.
One of the things that happened just before COVID was really kicking off, and Jen hinted at it, I think, with some of hers, is the state of the art for where AI has changed dramatically over the past bit. And we have these massive language models and things like Hugging Face, where you can just pull a well-trained BERT model or deep passage retrieval, and being able to use these to really accelerate your development. At LinkedIn, back before I shifted into assessments, one of the things I owned was the search type ahead. This is a thing you type in something at the top of LinkedIn, and it's searching through 6 or 7 different large databases. And that flow had over 50 engineers through all the stages, from intent modeling all the way down into the search and the deep models down there, and then back up again. And looking at a team, that's 50 people for just one little box you type into. And I have one NLP person, plus myself to help out a little bit here and there. And so it's got to be really, really focused, and it's got to be tied into what does the user need to be a little bit faster in their decision. So we started out with just find the things that are like questions. So we had to tune a little bit, because in interviewing, they're not actually questions. We call them interrogatives, kind of like drawing from the legal area. but just highlight them in the interview. And that's the first step. They can scroll down. Oh, there's a bold place. Let me listen. Oh, there's a bold place. And then moving it into scoring, helping, all right, you asked this question, now score it, and then jump. Step by step, just bringing a little bit more, each time trying to get that feedback from the user. No, you were wrong. And if they tell us we were wrong, that's actually a gift, right?
Yeah. And Joel, I'm going to keep it with you. So Jen brought up the notion of resources and resource constraints that scale over time, and certainly as you all raise capital, go away, and certainly you've got more engineering horsepower. But as a founder, and for the founders in the room, as you think about, and Rohan, you'll talk about GPT-3. Joel, you just brought up some other tools and models. As you think about the infrastructure that has been laid over the past 10 years, now you've got more tools available that allow you to go from idea to MVP to hyperspeed faster than ever. How do you evaluate the upsides and the downsides of relying on third-party programs and third-party models as you are beginning to build your own products?
Yeah, so I think GPT-3 is interesting. It's a large language model that this company, OpenAI, productionized, where anyone can use it, basically leverage one of this, state-of-the-art model. But I think really Google and Facebook did way more than OpenAI here, where Joel was talking about some of the libraries that were built on Google and Facebook's models. I think GPT-3 is kind of like a stopgap. It helps you productionize a product pretty quickly, but then being able to really dig into the models themselves, the architectures, and specially tailor them for your products allows you to do really cool things that you can't with some of the more open source models. That being said, 10 years ago, we would never have been able to build Quillbot. We were able to achieve a state-of-the-art accuracy with just three of us, and that's really because we were standing on the shoulders of giants like Google and Facebook, who were really, honestly generous with how much knowledge they shared with the world.
100% on that. We can, like to your question, it used to be a conflict. Do we, and it would be if we went with something like GPT-3, but with the BERT, DPR, these models that have been released, we can start from them, but we can start tuning them. And incrementally over time, as we build up our data assets, we get that feedback back from the users, they stop being their models, they become our models. And it doesn't have to be this or that. We get the best of both worlds, and it gradually swings as we improve.
I think an important thing to, at least the way I think about it, is what stage of company you are in. So I think actually as a founder, one of the hardest things is validating a need. Before building the tech, before productionizing something, it's do the users have a painful enough problem that I want to solve? And I think GPT-3 is the perfect tool to validate that kind of pain and that kind of need. And I think once you do validate that, I do think the next step is to use a lot of these open source tools that Facebook and Google have very generously opened up. But I do think that GPT-3 and these out-of-the-box models have a great purpose in the ecosystem.
Just going to derail a little bit, but another thought that came into mind, especially for some entrepreneurs may be looking at building, is it's really tempting to bring in, if they're not in the founding team, a really hardcore modeler. But it might be a year, could be longer, before you have enough data for them to be really challenging them. So as you're bringing these early NLP, ML types, make sure that they're really happy to actually be building also. Otherwise they're going to be sitting there and they're going to get frustrated. Look for builders, look for people who are really happy to work on the back end stuff and help build up those assets so that they can dig in. If you bring them in the big shot too early, they're just going to get frustrated.
Yeah. So let's keep on going with that. So as you all, having been founders and now speaking to other founders, Joel, you just brought up, I think, a great suggestion. What other traits do you all tend to see in great founders of AI companies?
Yourself, Rohan.
Just describe
The
yourself.
question's Constraints.
The question was not constraints. The question was,
All describe each other, but the person
you
to
can
your
all
left.
No, I mean, if you really think about it, what are the traits and characteristics, particularly today versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, of founders that you believe have this just sense of inevitability around them as they are now entering into the AI space?
So this came up a little bit earlier too, but what we see is people who either specialize in like product, design, engineering, or like machine learning. And being full stack there is very, very important for a founder of an AI company because they're all very closely linked. And what happens when you go and hire is you find very specialized talent. But if there's no one sort of bridging the gap between those different functions and really understanding, okay, how does the product inform the machine learning model and how to build the model in a way that fits in well with the product or fits in well with the engineering tech stack or anything like that, you can make really fatal design decisions. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is being full stack.
I guess to piggyback off of that, because that's a lot of great qualities in one individual, and if you come across them, let me know. I want to hire them. For us, what we would say is people who really understand the application of technology well, right? So to me, it was always our founding team that were amazing engineers, but for some reason also had product sensibility and user sensibility and could tell you exactly why this particular button actually should be here because that's a better user experience for somebody, right? As well as then turn around and code up an entire platform in one day or on their plane ride back. So I think to us it was that magical mix, product sensibility, understanding application of the technology.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but I guess to build off of that and say something new, I'll say understanding what AI can do and what can't do, I think is extremely important. I think a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people I've talked to, I think misunderstand like their use case or the industry, and I think want to apply it in cases where they're not leveraging the power of AI in the best way that they can. I think the other thing, separate from building off of them, is this field is changing so fast. Like we use like transcription, we use generative like NLP models, and both fields are just going so fast. And in a month, things can change so quickly. So someone that's like very curious and in tune and willing to adapt to all of the like fresh updates that are coming so quickly.
To riff on that and go one more step, there's what you can do and what you can't do. And I think there's another thing that's really important, especially in the space for like this conference, is what shouldn't you do? And as an AI leader, there's certain problems that you might be able to can, but shouldn't. And for us right now in the funnel, in the hiring, actually evaluating the candidate ourselves for us this year at least is absolutely in the shouldn't area.
Perfect. So we've got about five minutes left, plus or minus, before everyone can go out and have a good time. Last question, then we'll do a lightning round. But if toxicity in data and toxicity in models was really, call it the term du jour over the past 10 years, what issues are you seeing right now in terms of data-centric and kind of AI driven models? And what are things that are maybe out there on the horizon that founders or we as investors or consumers or buyers of product aren't focusing on?
So maybe I understand, maybe I don't, but one of the problems that is challenging for us right now is we are using third-party transcription services. And they are really, really not solid on non-native English speaking accents. And if you add in a argot, special language for the area that's being interviewed in, combine these two together, and their transcripts look like word salad. And that is not good as the interviewers are coming back and trying to figure out what happened in the interview, and they can't read it. And this drives them, then the audio quality has to be good, and maybe even you need the video so you can see their mouths moving and get that extra signal, because the transcript's not. And so putting pressure back on the transcription providers to ramp up the quality of this stuff, super important.
Kind of along the same theme is that we talked about having your product feed back into your data and to improve the data set and quality, but I think the thing that we then realize sometimes is that your data has limitations and bias based off of your product and where you're collecting data from, and where you have popularity, or where you might have gaps, and what populations might not be participating in your process, and therefore you don't have a great representation for them. And so I think for us, it's now thinking about, sometimes we think about all this huge amounts of data that we're collecting, but where, even in that huge scope of things, where there still might be biases and where there still might be gaps that were kind of leading us maybe to over-optimize in one particular area.
Yeah, so on the topic of bias and toxicity, I think I'm a bit bearish that we'll be able to effectively solve for toxicity. I think as developers of AI-centric products, it's our job to manage it. And it doesn't accurately reflect the viewpoints of the engineers or the developers or the company at all. It's just a sort of byproduct of leveraging the entire internet to train your models. But I think moving more into a mindset of managing the toxicity and building the product in a way that gives users an out is really important and essential if you're building any AI-centric product.
Yeah, I want to jump on that and completely agree with you. I think in managing, we've also seen how culturally specific and also current event specific some of the definition of toxic can be. So for example, our entire user base is in Taiwan. They're extremely sensitive to how we talk about China. That might not be true if our user base was Italian. So that's something that we've specifically accounted for and modify our data set to get our AI to perform better around the topic of China. And then the other thing is Russia just recently invaded Ukraine. I think if our users wanted to talk about Russia or Ukraine 3 months ago, 4 months ago, it wouldn't have been considered a sensitive or a toxic topic, but now it is. So I think, again, as leaders, we need to be ahead of it or very on top of managing these kinds of things.
Perfect. So 2 minutes left. So parting thoughts. What leaves each of you most excited? And when we come back here in 5 years from now and 10 years from now, what do you think we'll be talking about?
Yeah, just freeing people up to focus on what they love to do. I think that's the biggest unlock that AI is going to give, and just making your days more productive and happier, because you can just focus on what you love.
Hopefully we'll have, I don't know if we will be talking about this or we'll be congratulating ourselves on this, but I think it's having the shift in education to really be pushing people on critical thinking and evaluation skills, right? A lot of this machine learning automation, a lot of the rote memorization, procedural knowledge, all that kind of stuff. I think there's definitely an important point for us to cover that type of information within learning, but that we can then shift more of our focus onto understanding concepts and then evaluating the information that we're being presented and going forward. So hopefully we'll have made good strides on that and we'll be celebrating.
I think AI is going to make language learning so much more accessible. It's going to significantly reduce the cost of super high quality English and language learning instruction. So I'm extremely excited about the sheer number of people that will have access to that in the next 10 years.
Very similarly, 5 years out, looking back, I would the language models, the language understanding, and going from that into the world understanding, to have that strong enough that you can have it in conversations in an interview, and it comes into this time to evaluate how they did into the interview, and it's 100% on how well they did and not worrying at all about capturing what they did and really getting into focus on that. And with that tools, you should be able to get through it so much faster and with better quality.
So with that, I will say thank you on behalf of the audience. Thank you to this wonderful group, and thrilled to have you in the GSV family, and thrilled to have all of you here with us today. Any questions for our great panelists? I'm sure you'll be over here and outside, and thank you everyone for being here.